All right, you are listening to MSP Waves Radio. I am your host, Agro. Currently Witness 12 on the Steam blockchain. It is 11 a.m. on April 21st. And, despite a small live audience, I think it's time that we try to get this conversation going. I'm going to go pull Ron, pull Dylan online. And so let's try this. Can you guys share a little bit about your first experience, like just even learning about Q or how you or just give us a little background of like why you care about these things.
All right, I might as well start. This is Globocop. Well, I've been doing, if you will, truth research since the 90s, I would think. And obviously, when the phenomenon of QAnon came, you couldn't ignore it, and it's quite mysterious, if you will. So you follow this, and when did it start? What, October last year, September, October last year?
Yeah, I think that's the rough timeline.
Yeah, and so obviously one has to take notice. For one, because they are right in terms of predicting things, and it seems to me that there is evidence that they are actually communicating with Trump in some instances.
Yeah, so I guess I should give a little bit more background. Q is an alleged military insider and likely a team of military insiders that are informing the public of ongoing actions inside the sort of counter coup. I guess I'd say we've been under a coup since basically Kennedy was shot, which is like I think it's somewhere between like 60 and 70 years now, and then we are currently living under the counter coup, in which the current president, working with military insiders, are actually taking the country back from basically the deep state, from the CIA, from the Bushes and the Clintons and Barack Obama. All right, so that was Globy. Dylan, do you want to go share a little something? Who are you, and how are you involved in this, and what's your interest?
Yeah, sure. I've been researching, conspiracies and the whole alternative history since about 2005. And I started this project called the Deep State Mapping Project, which was basically applying my knowledge of conspiracies to artwork in 2017, actually the day of the inauguration when I started it. And then I heard about Q in November from Jordan Sather, I guess popped up on my YouTube recommended. And that's how I found out about him. So I came in on the Q post about 15 or 17 or so days late from when it actually started, but I'm pretty surprised I found out about it as fast as I did. So, and then, the artwork I started creating to organize my thoughts about Q, which I started around November 20th and then released online on New Year's Eve for 2018, became known as the Q map. So although I had no direct connection to Q, something I created has been linked to Q, and people think that that's what Q was talking about when he was talking about his map. So can't say if it is or isn't, but that's what happened.
All right, and then Ron, do you want to share a little bit about what your background is and why you care and what interests you, or what makes you think it's real or what makes you think it's false? You posted an image just a second ago.
Yeah. Okay. I'm wondering. I think we are all very loud, and you are quiet. As I was trying to say earlier in the audience, your audio is a little bit off, so I think the audience might be having to turn up and down a little bit. Anyway, I'm just here because I'm a skeptic. I have been following Q since he started. At first, it looked like Q was giving out some relevant insider information. But as time has dragged on and more stuff has come out, there's been less and less relevant information coming from the QAnon trip code. So it's, I don't know. I've just been following this since the beginning. Actually, I announced Q the very first, when he first showed up on 4chan, before he even moved to 8chan, before all that ever happened, before the calm before the storm thread started happening. We were talking about that on Free Speech. But as the time has gone on, I don't know. it's been a crazy rabbit hole that I've been going down, and it's quite interesting. I don't know. It's definitely food for thought, and it's a fun thought exercise, you know. But
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't start as soon as he came out. I found out about this. Actually, I found out about this through Dylan, who's with us today. Dylan made the Q map. Comedy Central took that Q map, they rearranged some things, they changed the spelling, they reorganized it, and then they made a hit piece, sort of on conspiracy theorists in general. They made sort of like a Matrix style mock episode kind of thing, and ultimately within that they use this sort of modified image. And Jordan Sather put that into one of his sort of weekly daily destroying the illusion posts. And I saw this, and I also saw that it had been altered. And so I started thinking, okay, this is now something that's worth looking into, because if they've gone to the trouble to take it, reorganize it, edit it, and then go through and start mocking it, it made me think that there were some parts of this that were true. So I went into this, and that's how I found Dylan, and then I started paying a lot more attention to Q in general. So I've been here for only like maybe 2 to 3 weeks, but as I sort of look through this, I've been kind of shocked by either, the purpose of the truth movement, I think, is that things like pedogate are real. Things like deep state corruption is real. There's just high crimes, treason, and it goes back as far as at least 70 years, probably back to 1913 and the creation of the Federal Reserve, and even really earlier than that, because that Federal Reserve is like the second attempt at starting the central banking here in the United States. So these are things that go back quite a long ways to sort of disrupt and disturb the United States, and sort of take a group of people that wanted to rule themselves and put them under a more direct control. And as the famous line goes, you can either do that through sword or by debt, and it looks like sword didn't work so well, so now they're trying debt. Now, that's some of the background of, I think that there's a at least multi-generational, potentially multi-century plan to sort of destabilize our country. And then when I look through, like, there's some recent Q drops that I find basically astounding. They're linking and able to link Abramoff, who is, the spirit cooker, to Obama through some of the people that are currently in the news being arrested for pedophilia. I think his name is Keith. He's from Nexium. He's getting busted. Allison Mack got busted. She's talking, and then either through some of the people connected with them or some of the clients, I mean, it starts going up to extremely high level officials. They have pictures of Maggie Nixon hanging out with Obama. They have pictures of Maggie's mom hanging out with James Alefantis. You can start connecting Alefantis to Comet Ping Pong, and basically the entire web of sort of human trafficking and child abuse. And these things run deep. I mean, you can start finding connections to some of the world's worst people. And I don't think that's an accident. I mean, I think that these folks are actually having conversations with one another, both in coded language and just frankly boldly in public. And I haven't seen reporting like that, or I haven't seen this much information being shared almost anywhere. So part of me says something like, okay, I can keep my skeptic eyes on and say maybe Q is a LARP and maybe this thing isn't real. But I do actually think it's also changing the narrative, like what you see on TV, what you hear on the radio, the images that come through the news stories are getting affected by this sort of Q stream of information, which to me is very much in line with the truth movement of exposing pedophiles, exposing human trafficking, and exposing treason of the highest order by U.S. officials.
Yeah, I'm glad you just made that connection to Mac, because I have been reading that, and sometimes you read things with Q, and he says something like Mac, and you kind of get lost, like, wait, which name was that? But I remember seeing that story before, but yeah, thanks, that cleared that up for me.
No, so is this Q that's bringing up this stuff, or is it people who are following Q that are researching that are finding this stuff?
Well, it's a mix, right? So, I don't know. Let me go pull up QAnon. So if I go,
So sometimes Q answers actually some comments of the followers.
so I just posted a link, and that links. That's a picture of James Alefantis sitting or standing in a photo next to Maggie Nixon's mom. So the um, that post was just something that somebody on the board had found, and then Q is posting and responding to it. Similarly, you can have, I don't know, let me see who posted this one. Um, so actually, Q is the one that posted this. So Q is posting that there's a link between Maggie Nixon, this 10-year-old girl who's actually like of the Nixon family, and there's Obama. And then he's also posting other pictures like this, where you can find Maggie Nixon and Obama kind of going back through the years, which is sort of surprising because allegedly this guy came out of nowhere, right? He's just totally out of left field as a politician. We have Allison Mack that's actually posting pictures on her wall. This goes back to January of Abramoff. So, and Q is sharing some of these. So he's both working with some of the people that are just nuns that are posting pictures, and he's uniquely posting these things himself. That's helping to show that Allison Mack, that's part of Nexium, which is currently being arrested and investigated for basically human sex trafficking, trafficking women, branding women. That's always sort of like deeply disturbing. But she's got ties to Abramoff, and Abramoff has ties to all these other people. And when you combine that, now where's my other image? So one of the last ones I want to show before I let somebody else chat about this. I got a picture in here somewhere of it's that spirit cooking thing, and that in the finger that you see on Obama, he's got that Band-Aid, and that Band-Aid is like, to me, it's the reference to like, take a knife, shove it in your finger, middle finger of your left hand, eat the pain, and it's like that entire spirit cooking thing. So you have, I have one that just sums it up. I don't know where I put the picture, but that.
Well, and there's that famous picture of John Podesta with the Band-Aid and like the fish drawn on one hand, and what's the number on the other hand? Like
14, I think.
Yeah.
14 and the infinity symbol. Here, I put it into the Q posts. I mean, so there's some chance to me that this whole thing is a LARP, and I don't want to. Here's the image. Open link, copy, paste. Go back into here. All right. So with a sharp knife, cut deeply into the middle finger of your left hand, eat the pain. So there he is. And that bandage on his middle finger is not like a unique one-time event. You're actually able to go see him have that in a couple of different shots while golfing, while doing other things. To me, you can start what this starts doing is building this web of who's connected with everybody that is in part being exposed by Q and in part being exposed by the sort of QAnons that run around and follow this thing religiously, which is to say that the former president is tied into this spirit cooking thing. Here are pictures that are tying him through other presidential families, and I don't know, the whole thing is both shocking, not terribly surprising, and just completely horrible.
Well, Angrod, if I may interject, we have to remember that everything has its origin in the spiritual. Whether you believe in God or not is besides. Everything has its origin. Everything is spiritual, and everything that we are looking at leads back to some sort of spiritual ceremony, if to call it mildly, and then it leads almost always, for whatever I don't know if you agree, but everything I look at always leads to child trafficking and child abuse and sacrifices and these kind of things. Everything that I'm looking at.
Yeah. And I think again that part of the reason why I'm so intrigued by this entire phenomena is that literally at the heart of this movement is busting pedophiles, and the Q phenomena seems really good at doing that. And I don't know. Um, there's some other image that I have, and I got like 8 million tabs open, but it's kind of the summary of all the things that have recently happened. Um, Basically, since Trump got elected,
And
we've
the thing though
seen.
is, it's widely underreported the thousands of pedophilia arrests that have been taking place since Trump took office. None of this, or hardly ever anything, is reported, perhaps in local news, but on mainstream media or national news, it's not.
Yeah, there's not nearly as much as we'd like, but again, um, it does make headlines, and it does actually get out there, and it does actually change the narrative. So this is actually a really good summary. I like this one. Um, so yeah, they're trying to stop him, presumably Trump. Yes, they're trying to smear and ruin him. Yes, they're trying to figure out how to impeach him. No, they are not making headway. Absolutely nobody in Congress is calling for impeachment right now except for the usual deranged suspects. The deep state was just dealt a huge blow with the recommendation for criminal charges. Trump just got denuclearized the Korean Peninsula and got Kim Jong un to agree to U.S. troops remaining in South Korea. The economy is growing and is as strong as it's been in 40 years. Russia just said that Putin is ready to renegotiate with Trump and wants to resolve their issues. Mexico is freaking out, and Trump is going to use the money he saves with the renegotiation to pay for the wall. China is slowly bending the knee on trade. Ford is now outselling Chinese manufacturing cars in China. 2,000 corrupt CEOs have quit in the last 6 months. Paul Ryan is gone, Flake gone, Corker gone, 3 grand juries impaneled, and at least 1 military tribunal sat. Backpage.com destroyed and founders locked up, responsible for 70% of the global sex trafficking, all brought to an end. 750 billion for the rebuilding of our military, raises for service members, deep CIA completely revamped, Pompeo cuts North Korea deal and not a single leak from any media, total control of the intelligence community. So, I think that's a summary of some of the changes that have actually been happening. And I'm not a huge fan of the United States government, but if you get rid of the sex trafficking, if you get rid of the um, sort of deep state willing to do anything to destroy nations, destabilize currencies, get hyperinflation, take advantage, steal resources. And if you get rid of those people and actually turn this back into sort of a constitutional republic, then maybe I won't complain so much.
Well, is that not the reason why President Kennedy was killed in the first place? Because his last executive order was 1111, I believe, if I get the number right, that said he's going to get rid of the Fed.
Yeah, I mean, people that have gone up against the Fed, it normally doesn't end well for them.
No.
Um, the Lincoln presumably went up against the Fed. You have Kennedy that went up against the Fed, but um, I've seen a couple people quoting and saying Trump wasn't supposed to win. So I don't know what intervened, whether the universe just finally the pendulum started swinging the other way, or these people got so sloppy that and so arrogant that they ran one of the most crooked politicians ever and lost.
That is a good point, Argold. Is there not extreme carelessness on the part of the deep state? If you look at Las Vegas, for example, what a sloppy job that was. The multiple shootings in different locations, multiple shootings inside the hotel, um, absolutely sloppy stuff. Maybe they just don't care, or they're just incompetent.
Well, I think in large part they're sloppy, right? Like they had the presidency, they had that, like with Brennan, they had the CIA, with Comey, they had the FBI. You have a lot of these deep state figures that are in extremely powerful positions, and so even if you have legitimate, good white hat kind of FBI, patriots working in some of these different organizations, they can't get anywhere because as they keep moving up, when they try to actually do something, it gets sat on and stifled, and people that are basically bought out. You don't necessarily have to control an entire organization. You just have to control the people at the very top of it. And that has seemed to work out pretty well for these folks for the past 50, 60, 70 years, potentially longer, as they've sort of worked out how to go contain all this. But again, you get up to something like hundreds of thousands of human trafficking cases. You see, like, literally, like, there's something like 165,000 kids that go missing in the United States. And that to me is an absurd number. That's like third world numbers.
Sickening number. And the way they counter that now, look at the UK. I spoke about this on Jane's Kill show yesterday. The UK citizens or residents now face up to 15 years of prison for merely looking at so-called right-wing content. Now, what's to define right-wing? It doesn't. So it's up to the bureaucrats to say, oh, that's right-wing and you're not supposed to look at that and you're going to jail. And then they mix that in with terrorism. So they put anything that's right of Pelosi, probably, as right wing, and then it's terrorism. And of course, who doesn't want a terrorist locked up? So the UK is moving aggressively to silence the free speech and the information flow, but it has never worked. I grew up in East Germany. You know what? It was one of the most tight-knit countries there was, yet I still got information and got it out to the people. You can't stop it. I got stuff smuggled from West Berlin and got stuff, that was in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, where I actually had paperwork that the mere possession of it would have gotten you jailed for a long time. And I distributed that stuff. This is where I learned that Stalin had gulags. Of course, nobody taught you that in school, but that kind of thing started to wake me up very, very early on. So the point I'm trying to make, you cannot stop information flow. Even if they shut the internet off tomorrow, well, we go back to radio ham,
Well, that's actually a very good point, Global. You can't stop the information flow. And I think everybody here is familiar with the Pied Piper strategy that Hillary tried to use for, in the leaked WikiLeaks emails.
Explain it.
Okay, well, in the WikiLeaks emails, the stated goal was to try to get Trump the Republican nomination. That was Hillary's plan, because she thought that would be one of the easy candidates to beat. There's no way that Trump would beat Hillary, one-on-one in the election. So it was called the Pied Piper strategy. Let's get out the stuff that we want to get out because it's useful for our ends. And I think that a lot of we have to be careful, because a lot of this stuff happens here in this information age that we live in. It's just like you said, they have no ability to stop the flow of information. So the best bet they have is to control what information people are absorbing.
And not only that, I would go with redirect, right? Like, you show people, here's
it's
some
classic
truth,
misdirection. Yeah.
Here's some truth. And then, let's go turn you this other direction. I mean, I saw that. I started becoming aware of that approach when it was like Zeitgeist, where they're saying, all right, look at all these problems, and now why don't we go to a resource-based economy where just a handful of people control all the resources, or even worse, a robot. Like, that to me was a startling misdirection of, let's go from, why even print money? Just give them all the resources they want right away. That to me was misdirection.
Right. Yeah.
That whole thing, by the way, isn't about money. They print all the money. That's why they got rid of the gold standard. So they print all the money they want. So they have all the resources. They buy it off with the worthless money. The Chinese are extremely good at that. They pretty much own Africa and move into the United States aggressively. And it's about power. It's not about money. That's the main point I want to make. Power and control.
Here, this is an image that's been floating around, and it's this alleged group is sort of the alleged Q group. You'll notice that there's a handful of people with their thumbs up, including the president. this is a tweet from the president, and he labeled the picture "Do It Q." So, I mean, I don't quite know what more I would want other than like the president coming out and saying, "Hey, my name is Q," or like I'm part of the Q team. But he's literally posting images saying, "Do it Q," and those images seem to have these people in the shape of a Q, and that. I mean, I don't know what else I'd want for like military intelligence. There was another example where somebody on the keyboard said, "Hey, please have the president say tip top." And in that weird little rambling Easter speech, he goes, you know, something about the White House. We'd like to say that we keep it in tip top shape, the very tippity top shape. And so he's really like emphasizing that, and that seemed to have gone back to the board. So maybe that's just an accident, but you know, it is supposed to be military intelligence. It's supposed to be, you know, not just his tweets. He certainly tweets plenty, but this is sort of some communication. There's another weird one where a couple of days beforehand of an attack, he mentions Q mentions B-19-2, and so there were two bombers that launched 19 missiles. That was in the attack in Syria like a week later. So maybe those two things are related. I mean, it's not word for word the same, but again, in terms of like what kind of evidence would I want to see? The president himself tweeting "Do it Q" with an image of intelligence staff. I don't know what else I'd want. Would that
Now,
make
where was the "Do It" Q on that? Was it in the tweet, or was that like the image
it's
caption?
no, it's the name of the file.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that. Wow.
So when is the date of this? This rough estimate? Like, is it
I think that's
past January, pre-January?
post
Because
January.
you know, if you follow Q, you probably have made your way over to the CBTS board on 8chan. This is where it moved initially after 4chan banned Q talk, because for a while there was you know, there was Q dropping stuff with this trip code, and then they started making threads, calm before the storm, and I think there was 300 to 500 of those threads on 4chan before 4chan finally started banning people for even making the threads, and then they moved it all over to 8chan, and they went to the CBTS. Now, the people over at CBTS are convinced that everything after January 2nd to 5th maybe is a LARP. The posting style changes dramatically. The whenever he would actually post, in the first picture I posted in here earlier was actually here, I'll post the link again. There's stringers there in the first one that are actual real stringers, like legitimate condensed information in what looks like code to the unassuming person. And then as time goes on, the stringers just stop making sense and just look like random, you know, random nonsense. Now, I don't know. I don't know if Q was ever. It takes a lot to convince me that there's a military asset anonymously posting on an image board telling people directly inside information, right? Like that's kind of a big claim. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, totally.
Well, to me, it's kind of like the modern version of like a radio broadcast you would hear during wartime. Like, you know, like, but that's kind of coded. Like, you know, we have so many troops on the front line, like slipping in coded words, you know, so that the enemy can't really understand. But it's sort of the modern version of that. And then the fact that Trump's been so into Twitter, his whole candidacy, and that he's into this like direct communication with the people, it seems like maybe something he had figured out, like a way to have sort of like his Twitter style, but without like the confines of Twitter itself. So that's why they moved it to 4chan or 8chan. But that's, you know, sort of how I see it as a possibility.
Oh, sure. And I mean, you know, this stuff is all within the total realm of possibility, but the fact of the matter is if you look at what Q is saying, and I mean, if you ignore the stuff that's coming up around it, which is important, so like the research that's coming up from people looking into all these pedophile groups and the research around all this stuff, that stuff is important, and I'm not saying to ignore it, but if you just take what Q says at face value and try to, I mean, at any point in time really, and try to make predictions with it, try to have any kind of useful information out of it, there's really nothing there, at least from what I've been able to tell, that really makes any kind of, that gives us anything useful. It almost seems to be a distraction. Now, the fact that these people are researching and still finding stuff despite that doesn't prove that Q is leading them there. I think, I don't think, I know for a fact, I've been around this kind of, this internet culture for a long time. These anonymous image boards are kind of like a battleground for truth. You have no name, you have no reputation. The only thing that matters is the words you put there in that particular post. And it gets, I mean, it's not for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart. You don't want to go there if you're easily offended, but it's really one of the best places to get at any kind of truth on the internet. It's unabashed free speech. And man, I forgot where I was going with all this.
Well, but that's also one of the worst places to go at the same time, right? Because people are completely anonymous and can feed you bad information.
Well, right. Well, it's completely anonymous and it's complete free speech. So yeah, it's the best and the worst, but it's also like some of the most beautiful things. If you're not familiar with like some of the crazy stuff that 4chan has pulled off, like one of the more recent, more popular ones that I think a lot of people might be familiar with is the capture the flag thing with Shia LaBeouf. Like he hit a flag somewhere saying, "We will not divide us." And they used like, you know, they looked at cloud patterns and contrails and tracked different plane routes, looked at the time zone and followed, like listened and, oh, here's this kind of frog. It's only in this kind of area, you know, like, and then found out that flag was in Tennessee with just a camera pointed to the sky.
That's pretty good.
You know, and I mean, the crowdsource intelligence that comes out of these places cannot be denied. And that's just one instance. Okay, chemtrails, contrails, what, I mean, that's not even the point. The point is they found a flag in the middle of the field, out in the middle of the country, at some guy's house that they wouldn't have been able to find without this crowdsource intelligence that they have. They have called in airstrikes on ISIS training camps. Did you ever hear about that story?
I don't know. Hit me.
Well, there was somebody asking about this picture. You know, like there was a video of this ISIS. You know, ISIS releases these really well polished, well produced videos of different things, and they happened to release one, and it was about their training camp or whatever. And somebody asked, you know, where is this training camp at? And so people started looking into it, and they found like the different power lines and different infrastructure and stuff around there. Were cross-referencing with Google Maps, and ended up finding the exact location of this ISIS base. And to find out they were talking with somebody who was with Russian military. They confirmed it, and then they pulled an airstrike on that exact place that night.
I hadn't heard that. That's amazing. But that to me sort of confirms why I should be following this thing anyways. I mean,
well, no, it's not. That's what I'm trying to say is it's not Q. It's the people that he is either distracting or helping. I don't know. He might be helping them. It might be an insider that's giving all the information he possibly can without, you know, being arrested for leaking classified information. Let's say if we just assume that, like, okay, this is an insider. He can't just go out and say, you know, yes,
I'm an insider. Let me know. Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah. If we just assume that Q is real, then we have to assume that he is also beholden to the law, where if he leaks classified information, he's going to go to Quantico for the rest of his life or whatever. Wait, is Quantico even a jail? I don't know. Anyway, I don't know.
Gitmo?
Quantico is like the CIA headquarters. I think you mean Gitmo.
Yeah, Gitmo, whatever. Yeah, and Quantico is a jail too.
Oh.
Movement says.
Maybe I'm wrong.
But no, it is. It's CIA. Oh, it's where Bradley Manning is. Okay, so yeah, if you assume that he is real, then he can't just go out right out and give you classified information. But there is ways of saying stuff without saying it too.
Well, the other option, I've seen some evidence that this guy might actually just be like a really well-informed truther, potentially with a big network of insiders, maybe not, but it might just be, I'm open to the idea. I know that for the absolute hardcore true believers that even mentioning this would be devastating, but there's a part of me that's willing to accept that this guy could just be a LARP and could just be faking it and could just really be. It doesn't feel like a distraction to me. Again, the distraction would be if things weren't actually happening that that go against the deep state objectives, like hiding their pedophilia and hiding their human trafficking. And so I see things like Backpage going down. That thing is absolutely amazing. That thing is responsible for something like 70% of the human trafficking that's on the planet. And now it's gone down. Whether or not that's linked to Q or not, sort of all the information that's kind of they're able to go tie to that, the people that they're tying to that, the people that they're tying to human trafficking, to some extent, I don't really care if it's real or not. I think the benefit of this entire movement and phenomena is that deep state criminals are getting further exposed. Now, maybe they're hiding some, like they have one line of something like trust Ray, trust Sessions, trust Huber, and trust one other person. So maybe that's not so awesome. Maybe they're naming names of people that we should trust that we shouldn't, or that maybe we should have some cause for alarm or something. But maybe those are good people. I mean, to me, without the actual insider information myself, and without, even while studying these boards forever and being in this fight since 2012, it's still really hard to know what is good information, what is not. I mean, one of my favorite memes of all time is the woman dragging herself through the desert saying, "Must find accurate news source."
I think one of the things we ought to remember, though, trust no one unless you know them personally and from experience. How else? You can't really trust anyone. So you need to investigate and critically think and, go down the rabbit hole.
Well, I think I like it when put trust but verify, because just putting blind trust in anything is how we got to this point now where mass media controls everything, and nobody. I mean, we live in an age now where the Oklahoma City bombing has been completely proven in court by congressmen, by judges, and by lawyers in the court of law to have been covered up by the U.S. government at the highest level.
It made no difference, did it?
It makes no difference whatsoever now. I mean, because the media doesn't report on that. You have to actually go look it up. And there's verify. I mean, you use logic to verify. And if logic isn't your strong suit, then I guess you're going to be ill-equipped. But, and I mean, everybody's fallible. There's nobody who's perfect at it. But the thing is you can use logic. Like, let's say, for instance, the Oklahoma City bombing. They say that a lone man with a fertilizer, with an AMPHO bomb parked, I can't remember, like 30 meters in front of the building, blew the building down, blew the whole facade off the front, which is impossible. They've actually taken that test. They've put a bigger AMPHO bomb closer to a smaller structure, and it caused less damage in a test in a desert somewhere. They have conclusively proven that there was bombs inside the building on certain support columns.
As there were in the World Trade Towers in all three buildings that came down.
Yeah, I don't
Oh,
think they've done a recreation of that in the desert yet, though.
well, the World Trade Center.
They have though. They have done tests with airplanes, crashing them into structures that were the same as the World Trade Towers, and they're at least a year ago, so it was still on YouTube. I don't know if it's still there.
Oh.
So Ron, what would it take you to not be a skeptic? What would you need for you to be like, okay, this is something I could trust. This is something that I think is real, and this is something I think is beneficial. What would you
Predictive
need?
capabilities. And I mean, not, let's just say like maybe we're too stupid to understand what Q is saying now, but like let's look back in time and see what he said and then see how it matches up to reality and stuff like that. And if he has predictive capability, even in retrospect, that would, it's just same thing with like what kind of scientific information is useful. Stuff that has predictive capability, stuff that is replicable, stuff that I can, you do this experiment, I do this experiment, we both see the exact same thing. We know that has predictive capability and it's useful information.
There's a danger though, because when even that can be manipulated, as we know from global warming. If there is data falsified and presented as factual, then it leads to wrong conclusions. And whenever we don't understand something like cryptic messages from QAnon, it is because we have data missing. And when we have data missing, it leads to wrong conclusions.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, but
But
I,
some of that
you know,
stuff should be clear. I mean, I've seen posts that go through and say, here are all the places that Q has been predictive. I don't have a handy reference sitting in front of me right this second, but there are QAnons that have gone through and basically pointed to, here are things that Q has said. Here's how they've come true later. Q will put up stuff like future proves past, and that's sort of a constant reference. But I think that's getting to your point of they put things in that are slightly coded now and then later on appear as real. Again, the first one that comes to mind is the B-19-2 or something, which were two bombers that struck Syria with 19 missiles. So maybe that's just coincidence, and I'm okay accepting that. If I hit a stream of numbers and letters on my keyboard, and there's a big effort or war or something happening, that there's going to be some correlation between things that I'm randomly typing over a long enough period of time to be like, here's that random thing I typed, here's something that can match it. Like, I believe that that's possible, but at the same time, I'm willing to believe that, um, here's a short code, and within a week, here's something that could represent what that code meant. Um, Maybe that's realistic. Maybe it's not. I don't know.
so
I, I think some of the comparisons to like what Q said to what Trump said on Twitter have been like very convincing, and others I've been like, that's a little bit of a stretch. Like I think one of the early ones that was really convincing was when Q did the 3+ signs at the end of one of his posts, and then Trump did the 3+ signs. But then, there's also people who question the timestamps, and I'm not versed enough in 4chan or Twitter to really understand which actually came first. But yeah, there's been a few instances where it's been a tighter connection, and a lot of instances where it's been a much looser connection or like predictive capability of Q.
now the plus, that was probably because I actually looked into that as well, and from what I can tell, the Q post happened before Trump, and
Yeah.
that really did give me some kind of, that's the exact kind of stuff I'm looking for. That's
Yeah.
the kind of stuff that tells me that this is somebody. But
Well, I was just wondering if Q had said anything about like Backpage.com before that went down. And I was just searching Q posts for Backpage and I didn't find anything. But that, something like that would be something that I feel like Q should have been able to predict and maybe like hint at before. But then you also have to wonder, maybe they didn't want to, let the cat out of the bag too soon. And that's why he didn't give us a warning on that one.
well, that's it. When I'm reading a lot of these Q posts, it's kind of like astrology to me, like a horoscope, very vague stuff, kind of telling people what they want to hear. And, as long as you don't really get too specific about anything and just kind of, you know, trust the plan and future predicts past or past predicts future, you know, just kind of leave really vague stuff while having a very acute knowledge of who you're talking to, you know, knowing your audience. This kind of stuff can be pulled off by anybody.
So
it definitely is a little bit astrology, like a little general, some of it.
So one of the ones was that I think it was the U.S. Department of Defense actually posted an image that I think came from Nat Geo that has a mug that's sitting on it with a giant Q letter on it. And then you could start tying that. This is in chat now. That's tying that to post by Q that then follow up by U.S. Department of Defense using some of the very similar language. I mean, again, chain of command is not something that's going to be unique to Q or unique to Department of Defense. That's something that you'll see, but seeing the image tweeted by the sort of spokesman for the organization, followed by comments saying chain of command and referencing that, and then going back to the tweet using that same language less than 2 days later. You know, again, does that prove it? No. I mean, I don't know what. Well, I don't know. There's going to be times that, like, you can't prove any of this to anybody's satisfaction, because you're going to have one day there's going to be like perp walks, and these guys are going to be walking down, and the hardcore supporters that are so like deep inside and believe all the leftist ideas and really stick with that, they're going to be like, oh, they were coerced. There's no reason that they're doing this. This is like an inquisition. They're being forced to say these things. Like, even when you have perp walks down the street, and even when you have the images, like if any of the HRC videos are real that show her involved in pedophilia herself, there are going to be people that say, oh, that video is a fake. Oh, it's too grainy. Oh, you can't believe that. Like, there's never going to be a point where there's going to be sufficient information. If Trump gets at a podium and says, hey, my name is Trump and I am working with Q, I mean, maybe some more people would believe it. I don't know. But again,
the one thing, though, Argot, I would say is if QAnon was 100% provable, then they would make themselves also a target. And that is out of the question. You don't want that. So you want to remain in a position where you have plausible deniability to just protect yourself and your sources.
So what's one of the other ones?
I thought of a really good one was when Q had posted Washington crossing the Delaware, and then one of the military Twitter accounts posted the same image, like pretty sure it was definitely after. And, you know, that's a pretty random painting from the past to pull up and to be able to correlate with a Twitter of a military account. Do you guys remember that one?
I don't.
Well, I think that was around either Christmas or New Year's. It was like during the period of 10 days, I think between Christmas and New Year's, when Q sort of went into a blackout. It was like right before that he had posted the Washington crossing the Delaware, and then either the day after or shortly after, I forget whose Twitter account reposted it, but it was one of the military's Twitter accounts reposted the same painting.
I mean, again, it is meant to be. It's meant to be like open discussion and likely truth. I mean, presumably both sides of this are following the same board. So even like that 100% truth thing, you would imagine that every now and then they would lie, because if they've been sort of announcing, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it, this is the next thing to happen, watch out, every now and then they would lie to go misdirect, not necessarily the public that's following them, but the people that they're running up against, or like basically to go screw with the deep state.
Well, you also have to assume the plan changes sometimes too. Like, you know, due to circumstances, they might intend to do something on a certain day, and then, you know, that gets delayed for a month. I'm sure we all know how that can happen in our personal lives or businesses when you expect something to happen by a certain time, and then it doesn't, or you decide to happen it differently. I have a meme I was going to share though. This, sort of one thing I'm pretty skeptical of Q was one of his really early posts. I think it was post number 32. He went on a long rant saying that, like, very soon there's going to be arrests of public figures, and this was back like in November 1st. And it's this long post of Q that's making a lot of predictions, and pretty much none of them came true. Like, to the extent that it sounded like that they were going to happen like in a short term, like from when he did this post. But at the same time, it does seem like the same sort of thing is going on behind the scenes. But it's like, I don't know why he would have posted this on November 1st, making all these really specific predictions if it wasn't actually going to happen within a month or two of then. But so that's, maybe one of the things I'm skeptical of on Q is what I'm posting here. This Q post number 32. It sort of was an introduction to everything that was going to happen.
I mean, Q to some extent, to me, fits into the bigger picture of, are things actually changing? And one of the biggest indicators that things are actually changing is the 25,000 sealed indictments that are currently under that are around the United States. And the Daily Dot actually went and did spot checks on. There's a handful of people that put together a graphic. Actually, I found the spreadsheet and then I lost it. It's a Google Doc, but I found it. But there's the image keeps popping up of the 25,000. The Daily Dot actually went and called through some of the precincts or some of the courthouses to go find out about it, and they said the numbers actually line up. So I don't know if Daily Dot counts as like mainstream media, but there are places that have verified, there are media outlets that have verified that those indictments are real. So 25,000 is quite a number. I remember reading that each one of those could have up to 50 names that are part of it. There are a handful of these that have already been unsealed, like the Nexium one was unsealed. And if those 25,000 indictments represent Nexium level arrests of high level human traffickers, first off, it's fucking disgusting just how many there might be, but that could literally represent, let's see, 25,000 times 50 is 1.25 million people. That would be, I think there's a cap of the number of people that can be on a single indictment. But that could be up to 1.25 million people that could be getting arrested for various forms of trafficking and other bullshit.
Soundwaves gets all of his news from your memes, Agrod.
Well, it's easier to go read the memes than it is to go read the news.
Oh, the Daily Dot, just while you're talking about it, that actually is it's a pretty reliable source for the stuff that I was talking about, as far as like the Shia LaBeouf capture the flag thing, and all, I mean, I think Daily Dot did an article about that. They did one about the Russian military striking the ISIS compound with the help of 4chan. Oh, maybe I might be wrong about that. That might be a different site. But Daily Dot does a lot of there's a lot of 4chan articles about them, about their escapades and their different troll campaigns, but what you have to understand is, and this is what I was trying to say earlier, these anonymous image boards, whether you love them or hate them, are quite possibly the best open source intelligence community that exists on this planet. And anybody who really understands like open source kind of can understand the benefits of the approach. You think, well, no, we really need a military with billions of dollars in funding, with the best intelligence technology possible, and only and secret classified clearance in order to be able to put together all this stuff. And no, you don't. Anonymous people with barely anything in common, all speaking to each other without knowing each other's names on the internet, are with way less information and way less technology and way less resources, are able to do a better job in a lot of cases. So once you understand that, then you understand how useful it would be to distract these people with something like with like, LARPing, like you're an insider and gaining everybody's attention. So I mean, the possibility of this being a Pied Piper strategy, to put it one way, is very real to me. I mean, there's a lot at stake.
Yeah, again, I can't fight that. There are people that are gonna would like rip out my throat for saying it, of how dare you question this thing. But I think it's okay to question, and I think it's okay to have a healthy skepticism. And again, I'd look to what is happening, or what is going on as a result of this. And to me, what I think you see is more exposure of, like, here are the crimes that Comey was committing. One of these posts seemed to be predictive. Q likes his booms, so he puts in 4 booms, and the next day we see Comey, Loretta Lynch, and 2 others all getting indicted. Maybe even Hillary Clinton, and I'll forget the 4th name. But they seem to be, a boom and a name is not much to correlate, but the main headline has 4 people that are getting busted. Um, that's pretty good. That was from April
That's pretty
17th.
good.
And then the next day, it's the 11 representatives send out a letter to go bust Comey, HRC, Loretta Lynch, and 1 other. So I don't know. 4 booms isn't enough.
Yeah.
The
There was
public.
another time recently Q said, watch the news tomorrow. I think it was maybe a few weeks ago. And so, I was watching the news the next day, and for most of the day, it seemed like nothing was really happening that was that big. And then I think in the afternoon, there was like an earthquake in LA, which pretty uncommon. And then a lot of people were saying that maybe like a deep underground base off the coast somewhere around there had been busted. And I was like,
Yeah,
well, that could be pretty big news for watch the news tomorrow. But it's, again, like, maybe it was a natural earthquake. So there's always like a seed of doubt. But I thought that was a pretty interesting correlation, the LA earthquake and watch the news tomorrow.
yeah, and that. So I like seismic stuff. I don't like referencing Ben Fulford as my only source, but when I like going back to the 311 tsunami attack, um, there's been a pretty consistent line of, you can put nukes under the ocean, and either through breaking apart fault lines or causing other things, that's what created that tsunami. And that was a nuclear blast or some kind of explosion, as opposed to a authentic earthquake, because of the ringing. And then I saw scientists that were working for the Japanese scientists, there was a translation that was walking through, here's seismic data of a standard earthquake, and here's seismic data for when there's blasting or when there's large explosions. And the main thing that's missing is a sort of ringing. When there's an earthquake, there's ringing. When there's an explosion, there's no ringing. There's a boom, and then it all
Uh,
fades. And when I was looking at the seismic data that was coming out of the LA event for the deep underground military bunker that is allegedly sort of, it was one of the it wasn't even just like LA, it was sort of out to sea.
yeah.
But when I was seeing the seismic data that was being reported on, it didn't look like there was any ringing. It looked like, here is a one-time blast. You could see the peak, and then there's exponential decay, and there's no ringing that happens after that. And so to me, it looked like somebody blew something up. And then when I looked at the island was like literally pouring smoke out of this thing. There were fires that were on the island, and it's like, I don't remember the last time that there was an earthquake and it suddenly set, a 5 point, like if it was like an 8 or a 9, fine. You get some like massive earthquake and the whole city turns to rubble. That's one thing. But you get like a 5.5, which is mostly rumbling, and that sets off like smoke and fire across the entire island. Like, that's a little bit hard for me to
Yeah.
believe.
That was pretty intense. I had forgotten about the pictures of the island, and I just learned what you just said about the seismic data. I mean, that's pretty intense.
So again, I can't sit here and say, hey, this stuff is all real. And in fact, I even have evidence that says, hey, at least one variant of Q is a LARP. And I'm pretty certain that at least one variant is. But that doesn't nullify the entire thing. And then more importantly, when I sort of walk away with, I have some healthy skepticism still, but more important to this is that the things that I care about the most of seeing, like in the truth community, seeing the networks getting dismantled, seeing high profile people going down for pedophilia, and like, so I've been talking about this stuff for a couple years now, and I remember going up, my best friend, who is not a truther, kind of came up to me one day. He's like, dude, I was just reading the news and they have all this Jimmy Savile stuff. You were talking about this stuff 2 years ago, and now it's on the news. And like he was sort of shocked by some of that, and that narrative that happened at the time was, look at all of these pedophilias that there used to be. Like, don't worry about it now. This is all stuff in the past. You don't have to be concerned. It is just history, and we're outing people that are now dead. But don't worry. Go back to sleep. Everything is fine now. And my point then was, look, don't fall for that. Don't fall just because some of this is getting outed that it's over. And so my sort of constant fear, and the thing that I'm hopeful about, is that this pedophilia that seems to go link all of these groups together continues to get exposed. And then by doing that, that's what I think Q is helping to do. And more, and if not just Q, then this entire sort of QAnon army is helping to break apart that network. And that to me is extremely promising.
Yeah, I think something else to keep in mind is, Q in the early on was doing this thing with like the 1+, 2+, and 3+ to mean Soros, Saudis, and the Rothschilds. And I think something to keep in mind is that, there might be higher levels of pluses that we might need to deal with after we deal with those three. And I'm not sure if Q is going to move on to address those. Q has said recently this year, like, we're saving Israel for last. So, I mean, that's hopeful in the fact that there's so many people in the truth movement, conspiracy researchers, who really point the finger at Israel, saying that Israel's either controlling the US or that, we're beholden to them. That, if that is the last card to fall, like, I'll definitely be very hopeful that the New World Order idea has been completely crushed. But I do think it is important to remember that it's important to research deeper than, what Q is saying might be the highest level. To be that just skeptical of, well, who's above that, like who's above Q, and make sure it's someone good and not, just the highest level of pedophiles throwing their underlings under the bus.
Yeah.
Well,
so
now,
go for it,
well,
Rob.
the plus thing, where was that confirmed? Is that just speculation from people who are following Q as to what that means? That plus means Soros, plus means, or whatever you said, or is that something that Q has actually came out and said and confirmed?
I think it's people's interpretation of Q's post, but then like it sort of became one of Q's abbreviations eventually, is what I understand.
Okay, because like in Agrod's post that he about this forum actually today, he has the Q map, or not the Q map. That's what you did. What is it called? The Q cheat sheet.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the Q cheat sheet, it's got all these different abbreviations, and then it's just what people think it means. Either through context clues, a very educated guess, or kind of guessing. And
Yeah. That's just some dude, right? This is not like Q has listed his own glossary or their own glossary and said, for future reference, mention these. This is just some dude on the internet who studies Q a lot, puts together, this is what I think these things reference.
And this kind of goes back to like Pizzagate as well. Like, you read all these leaked emails, from John Podesta, you notice they're absolutely talking in code. And then you have the Pizzagate cheat sheets, which, says map equals DNA or semen or something, and handkerchief is a code for, you know, like, and they took educated guesses, but it's still a guess. This
Well,
is still speculation.
those things are a little more certain because the handkerchief code's been around since the 1970s. So that stuff is a lot more established than what Q is doing.
Well, sure, sure, okay. So, but here's the thing is, well, I know my father used to sell pot, and when he would get on the phone and talk to somebody about selling pot, he would say, he would ask about used tires, and used tires was code for pot on the phone. Now, if anybody was listening in on that, they would absolutely know. I mean, you know, you don't call somebody every day and ask for used tires, right? Like, it's obviously a code. And maybe with an educated guess, you can guess it's drugs in general. Maybe if you did a lot of more investigation, you can find out it's weed specifically. But if there happened to be like a code somewhere else about used tires, you know, if it was used for, like, maybe some terrorist group was using that as a code for their nuclear stuff, you know, or whatever. There's easy ways to correlate this stuff and then get fixed on it without and lose the bigger picture. You know what I mean? So I really hesitate to put any of this to heart. Movement sells pot, just because they could be talking about anything. Just the Podesta thing. Like, I literally believe that there is a satanic Luciferian death cult that is at the top echelons of our powerful institutions around the world. Really, pretty much any country you live in. And I believe that something like Frazzle Drip, the rumored Hillary Clinton filleting off the face of a kid and wearing it pedophilia video that exists, I believe something like that might actually exist. Now, I also know that once something is on the internet, it spreads like wildfire. And there's even a phenomenon called the Streisand effect. As the more you try to censor something on the internet, the more widespread it becomes.
Yeah.
The people on 4chan and 8chan, if one of these people got a hold of that video, it's game over. Everybody would have it. There's no way to stop it.
Yep.
Which is why I don't think that particular video exists.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. No. Q said fake. We control.
Yeah. The thing that got out there as a potential was like an image of a chef. I mean, I found some of those images that were allegedly from Frazzle Drip, and they're like just somebody is grayscaling images off the web. Now, maybe those people are also connected or bad, because it seemed like that was also some kind of creepy cooking show. But that one wasn't the HRC video. To the best of my knowledge, that thing hasn't been spread. But there have been, I mean...
Well, and that goes right back to what I'm saying about the Q thing. Like, this is quite possibly just a distraction to distract the people who would be, you know, if these people are right over the target, if these people are getting close to uncovering something, your best hope isn't to shut them down and, you know, and try to censor them, because that causes the Streisand effect. The best hope is to distract them and mislead them and have them looking in dead ends instead. But give them enough of a grain of truth in order to keep them interested, but make sure that they're interested in something that's going to ultimately achieve your goals instead of getting them to the truth or you know.
I totally agree with that. But what would you want them? What would you want Q posting about? Like, what if Q is real, and let's say that Q was doing everything that they could do to say I'm real without, like, here's my face, here's my name, here's my position in the army, or I'm in the, like, U.S. Naval Intelligence, this is the information I'm getting. Like, assuming that this is some kind of military game, whether it's a psyop or not, but maybe they're actually there in their white hats. What would you want them talking about? What would you want them exposing? What would you want them trying to bring to light?
Well, it's not what I want of them. I want actionable intelligence, actionable, tangible, you know, links there is a whole host. We got way too much information right now. There's a problem. We have basically the world's knowledge in the palm of our hands, in our pockets and our smartphones. And in order to filter through that information and find all the links between all the different people, all the stuff that's been buried, is actually quite difficult. And so if there isn't, I mean, there's been plenty of insiders who have leaked stuff on 4chan anonymously, and they didn't even have to prove who they were, except for by releasing information that nobody else knew. Right? And then once they did that, like, it didn't even, like, there was no question that they were an insider. And that's all Q would have to do. I don't, whatever he has, whatever he can share for the good of humanity to stop, like, the torture and trafficking of children, to stop the blowing up of people all around the world, to stop, these terrorists who now control basically every Western government and by proxy all the puppet states they've set up. That's what I would want. I mean, actionable intelligence, not cryptic stuff that nobody can act on.
Dylan, Globo, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the main point of Q is just prepping people for the arrests that are going to be made, like in terms of, ex-politicians, just because, it would destroy society if people weren't anticipating like the level of corruption that could be exposed eventually. And so I think, he's getting people who are already truthers on board, making sure enough people are up to speed, and then hopefully the truthers will have a conversation with their Hillary Clinton supporter friends, so that when the shit finally does hit the fan, there's not like the Women's March in the streets in every city, and the whole fabric of society unravels. I think that's really the point. And I think also something I've been thinking recently is that taking down the deep state is one thing, and then dismantling the military industrial complex is going to be a whole nother level, because the deep state is the evil actors at the top, like the Satanists, that are really pushing these wars. But at the same time, our entire economy is structured around the military industrial complex. And so to really end these wars and end U.S. aggression and close the overseas bases, I think we're on the road to that. But that's going to be a whole nother level of, after we've purged the corruption, dealing with economically how we can set up our society to not rely on war and selling weapons as like one of our main economies in this country.
Dylan, very, very, very good point to prep people. What I want to add to this is also to give hope to those of us who seek truth. And to me, when I see correlation and predictions becoming reality, or factual stuff is just confirmed, then that gives me hope and it keeps me going. And so it's multidimensional, the purpose of QAnon. Whether it's intended or not, it just keeps me going. Am I still quiet out there?
No, I mean, you sound clear to me. Okay.
Yeah, you're nice and clear. You're quite a bit quieter than Dylan is in my ears.
1, 2, 3 test. Thank you.
I'm going to turn that. I'll turn them up a little. All right. So where do we go from here? I mean, what should we be thinking about? What should we be looking for? What do we need to prove these things? Like, do you guys think this is a worthy phenomenon to pay attention to? I've started paying enough attention where I'm basically doing daily posts about not only what Q is posting, but then also what other researchers looking into this are finding. Do you think that's worthwhile, or do you think that would lead to more people just getting off track or something bad?
I think, though, Agrod, the more data we have, the better decisions we can make. And QAnon is not necessarily the data, it's just another piece of the puzzle. So yeah, we ought to pay attention, because we got to gather as much information as possible and then sieve through and make sure what's the word? What's not consistent with the overall picture and what can be disregarded. So the more information we have, the better decisions we can make.
Yeah, we would be fools to ignore a military insider feeding us, even if it's quite cryptic. Even if we can only grasp 1% of information from them, like we'd be fools to ignore it. But to prove that he's a military insider is a whole other task, and I think the claim requires some extraordinary evidence. Which, going forward though, I don't think you should. I don't think Q's to be ignored. I still pay attention to it. I don't completely shut it out of my, just in case it is something that comes to be true. Because there is still a chance that he is a military insider, and there is a chance that some of the information will provide some important links that the general public is missing. But on the other hand, I think the biggest thing that people should be looking into is understanding the history. Go look up the Franklin cover-up. Go watch the Conspiracy of Silence, a great documentary. Go understand the history of these cover-ups and of this pedophile cult. Go look up the Finders. It's another great one, completely covered up by the top echelons of our government. These child trafficking, ritualistic torturing, human sacrifice. There's nothing off the table. And I believe this is this kind of sick and depraved club is the only way you can really ever obtain power. That way they know you're completely and wholly controlled. Like, there's no way you're going to go against party lines when they have you on video raping and murdering a little kid. Like, there's no way you're ever going to, you will under torture deny everything. So
Sorry, go ahead.
What people need to do is understand what has already been proven. They really need to go understand the history of what's going on. Go read the witness testimony from the Franklin cover-up. Go read firsthand accounts of what happened. Go see how this was covered all the way up to the Bush Senior White House. This little Nebraska incident completely, it's just so mind-blowing. The truth is way, way stranger than fiction. And once you understand like this history, you can start seeing patterns in our day. And I guess the past proves what is that Q says?
Future proves past.
Yeah, the future proves past. That's kind of relevant. That's, you can understand how this group works by looking at the past deeds, even just the glimpses we get in. Because even with all this stuff, you understand the reason we know like this is a cover-up is because they hid a lot of evidence. We don't still have the full picture. We just have little snippets here and there. But the cover-up went all the way up to the highest echelons of government. So that means they're either complicit or they're either like covering up for a friend or they did it themselves. You know what I mean?
Do you think that things are changing? Like, to me, I think Backpage coming down and that was a centerpiece is a major deal, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't just all shift to Craigslist now. Do you think that this is really, are we seeing the end and this is all sort of unwinding, or are we seeing it's all just shifting? Like, one of you said, hey, when Israel and the sort of neocons there go down and the deep state there goes down, we're done. My first thought was like, a lot of this stuff came out of World War II, came out of Operation Paperclip. It was right after Germany fell. So if we had just said, hey, look, we won, Germany's over, there's nothing else to worry about, and now we're here. I don't want to just take what looks like some positive events and say, okay, well, now I can just go back to sleep and don't need to worry about this. What do you think that there's progress being made? Do you think that we're actually seeing some of this stuff unwind? And what's going to send off your sensors of like, wow, we're finally back on the right track?
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and jump in. Like decentralization. When I see federal government, you know, giving up power, that's when I will start thinking we're on the right track. As of yet, it's not happening. Donald Trump is still, he's expanding the scope of signing executive orders to, you know, go at like what was that executive order? I can't remember exactly. He signed one that basically where he can detain U.S. citizens on war crimes or something like that, crimes against humanity, right? Now people are using this as evidence that Trump is going after the pedophiles in conjunction with all the different sealed indictments and all that different stuff as well. But it's Trump making the federal government more powerful against citizens, which I'm always wary of. Because even if he is this savior of mankind going in there and helping all these children and saving all these, let's just assume that that's the case. When the next person gets elected, is that gonna be the case still? Are we gonna elect an angel twice in a row, right? Or are we gonna get a Hillary next time, who has these exact same powers, but then can use them on the people who are fighting for fighting the pedophiles and fighting this stuff, and then use it against us, right? So, I mean, the problem is government power. As long as there's a government power to buy, people are going to lobby for that government power, either through back channels or blatantly, with well, I'm not even going to get into all that. It's just everybody knows you buy government power, like the corporations own the government. Everybody doesn't even blink an eye, but then they want the government to do something about these corporations. Like, let's give them more power. Okay, so the corporations will write the laws that will they'll write the legislation that gets passed into law that tells them, that restricts them just enough to keep them in business, yet make sure that keeps the competition out. And that happens over and over again. And it feels like I'm taking crazy pills where people keep asking the government to solve their problems. So that's what I'm looking for, is decentralization. And once decentralization starts happening, we're going to be on the right path, but it's not happening yet.
Yeah.
So I would think, though, that if you were to decentralize now, this whole thing, the deep state would just take over again and would regain and exponentially multiply their powers. So Trump is smart enough, I think, that he is using his powers to move into that direction. But if we just decentralize now, it would just have the opposite effect, I would think.
Well, you do make up a good point. Like right now, if our government were to collapse, we'd have another government, and it might be even worse than what we have now. Another one would spring up maybe after a war, after there was a big fight for the power. There is a power vacuum that's left because there's a market demand for people who want government to provide services. They don't think that competing companies can provide this. They want the government to do courts. They want the government to do police and military and healthcare, retirement fund, whatever. They think the government should do that. So they are going to demand for a government, and they're going to get one. You know what I mean? And so it would take a population with no market demand for government to provide these services in order for true decentralization to occur. But working in steps towards that, I'm just not, just like I said, okay, even if he is an angel, like let's just say Trump is doing everything with the most pure intentions that we can assume. And he is using the ring of power, to use a Lord of the Rings reference. He's using the ring of power for good. Well, that's not going to stop the next person from taking that exact same power that was, used and maybe even like upheld by the courts, to just turn that around right on the people who it was intended for. Right. So no, I still think we should be against every grasp of power. The fundamental thing is these global elite have most of their wealth tied into like the value of the dollar, just like the average everyday person. Once all this starts falling down, the Federal Reserve is worthless. You know, the dollar is going to hyperinflate. The British pound is going to hyperinflate once the Central Bank of London, you know, if the whole thing comes down, if the whole military industrial complex, the whole Wall Street, everything is all tied, and everybody understands that too. The people who are working in this, they understand that, like, okay, yeah, you know, these people maybe are trafficking children and torturing them and stuff, but if we were to take them down, it would literally put everybody in poverty overnight. It's going to be mass chaos in the streets. People are going to be starving to death. And that's actually way worse than, you know, a couple thousand children being tortured and slaughtered out in these elite ranches everywhere, you know, across the world. So, you know, this is the kind of stuff that goes on. I mean, this is how, like, a level of a conspiracy can actually exist at this point, because everything is so tied together. Everybody knows that if you pull one of these strings down, the whole thing comes unraveled.
So you mentioned the Federal Reserve. Ron, do you remember what the website is for the Federal Reserve?
No, I don't. I've never been there.
Does anybody know? Anybody that's part of this channel?
No.
It's probably not a .gov site.
Well, that it's funny you should mention that exactly. So here, like, again, I get my information from random anons, so who knows how good that is. But it recently changed from federalreserve.org to federalreserve.gov. And that's after Trump got elected. So one thought is the Federal Reserve got purchased and is now actually part of the United States government, where it had been a private organization before. So,
well, that's helpful.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. When I went, it is federalreserve.gov. That's where it is now. I don't have any personal recollection of it being federalreserve.org previously. Maybe there's an archive or something that we could go to that would show it used to be federalreserve.org. But that seems like it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I think just to respond to the idea that, you know, we might get a politician after Trump who's going to just reverse all this, and, you know, someone like Hillary or Obama or Bush that would just take down everything Trump did. I really think that what we're seeing is a bigger change than that. Like, I think that just taking down the pedophile rings is sort of the first step of this plan of the white hats and Trump. And actually, I think the very first step of the plan was taking out these really horrible international trade deals. Like, the first thing Trump did on day 2 of being a president was destroy the TPP, which was, I think, one of the main, like, stepping stones towards the New World Order that had been prepared for years and years. And so that was thrown out the window on the first day. And then, you know, later in the year, he threw out that Paris Accord. So, you know, I think we saw the first year focused on, you know, killing the trade deals that are bad, and then starting to take out the pedophile rings. And now 2018, we're seeing the pedophile rings being taken out even more. And I'm hoping by the end of the 4 years, we're also going to see, you know, a move away from the oil-based economy to hopefully a new energy economy. Hopefully disclosure of technologies, hopefully disclosure of, you know, cures for diseases, and then hopefully some kind of currency reform. You know, we were just talking about the Fed. Like, I think ending the Fed will really change the power structure in America, and, you know, set up for a different type of president to be elected after Trump. And also, I think that Trump is going to focus on doing some things towards election reform, so that, you know, we'll actually might have an honest election and not have what we had for the past, you know, 3 or 4 presidents, which was completely rigged elections. And I still don't even know how, you know, Hillary's election wasn't rigged itself. But so I think that was a miracle, and that Trump in these next 4 years is going to set up better election systems to get an honest candidate. That's my hope. I mean, or he could just set it up to get someone else from whatever society he is a part of in, but we'll see.
So Lee Camp has done some pretty fun reporting. One of which was that there's now 57 or so CIA operatives, some of whom are just completely public of. I was recruited by the CIA to go do this, but there's over 50 CIA operatives that are running for different parts of Congress in this midterm election. And then the other one that he just put out was a story about how Debbie Wasserman Schultz's opponent has been putting together a lawsuit against her for not only rigging the ballot and having everybody in her state basically ignore the fact that they rigged it, but then she went and had all of the ballots destroyed. So you can't even go back and like look at whatever raw fake data may or may not have been part of that. Like literally every single ballot has been destroyed in that process. So to me, there's, from looking at Diebold, I don't even remember when I started paying attention to this, but maybe as far back as 2012, I've been thinking, these voting machines are not safe. They're rigged. This whole thing is bogus. What a bunch of horse shit. So I think that is a pretty major part of, you know, if the very fundamental process by which we elect these officials, if you can't even get change in that because it's broken, how are you going to get anything other than more institutional bullshit to go keep getting created?
Well, this just happened in Alabama. The Democrats literally stole the vote in Alabama, and it was challenged, and nothing was done about it. I haven't read on it. This happened a little while back, so I'm not really quite up to date on it. But it was blatant voter fraud, and I mean just absolutely blatant, and it's just got covered up. Nobody talked about it, and yeah, somehow the Dems stole a completely red state like Alabama. Now, if it can happen there, it can really happen anywhere. But what I want to say real quick, though, is federalreserve.gov has been around at least since 2004. So that guy was fake news. That Twitter, you can click the link I put in there, the webarchive.org. That's a Federal Reserve page captured in 2004.gov.
And is it the same thing as what was there for .org? I mean, again,
.org just showed so federalreserve.org showed a different page. I'll get that one up. That was it says welcome to US Petabox is what it says. PETA box. And that's all it is.
That's weird.
So yeah, and that's what all the caps show. Like there's a few different captures of this from between I think 2011 and 2013 is all that's captured from. That doesn't mean that's all that existed, but you can look through them and they just show like this single welcome to Petabox. Welcome to the .gov.org thing was fake news. Okay. Easily verified by Web Archive.
Well, that's why I put it up. I'm not saying this is how it is. I mean, I look to go explore these things.
No, absolutely, and that's questions worth asking, and that because I totally thought too that it wouldn't be a .gov web address since they literally, even publicly and officially, that's not a government entity. It has the who is it? The board director is appointed by the president. I think I can't remember exactly how many of the board are appointed by the president. There's one or two picks, and then the rest are, privately chosen.
Okay.
And the people who own it are sealed. Like you can't find out who owns the Federal Reserve in any kind of official sense.
Yeah, I found there's something from like the 1970s. Who owns the Federal Reserve? 1970. And there are some articles that that point to some of this stuff. Like I found crap. This is now 5 years since I was looking at this, but I did actually find some information of stuff that came out of maybe a government report or something, but it showed some of the ownership of the Federal Reserve. but I haven't been able to find anything that's post like 1970.
But I think we were hitting on a really good nerve. I'm sorry I went back to the Federal Reserve thing, but we were talking about the voter fraud. And Global Cop, you were going to say something. Did I make you lose your train of thought?
No, I still got it. So the voter fraud is happening all over the place. Just consider the mayor elections in London. Sadiq Khan was stole the vote blatantly. Nothing was done about it. France had in surveys in what do you call it, Ron? Not surveys.
Polls?
Polls, the conservatives were way ahead there. There was not, 80% of the young generation wasn't going to vote socialist. And the Netherlands, where the conservatives there were way ahead. The elections were stolen. In Austria, it happened. In Germany, Merkel, now dictator in the fourth term, I doubt it that she won the election legitimately. So the elections is a scam, in my humble view, and it's happening all over the place, not just in Alabama.
Now, I'm going to post a link here in the chat. This Battle of Athens, have you guys ever heard of the Battle of Athens?
I don't know. Give me more context.
Nope. Okay, so the Battle of Athens happened in McMinn County, Tennessee. This was in the early 1940s. The men were returning back from the war. They had corrupt politicians that were starting to steal. So one guy got in, started stealing elections. He was, beginning the nepotism and he stole elections for himself and then started getting his buddies elected in other places. Started really consolidating the power there. The boys started returning home from World War II. They were getting arrested, and the county was getting a lot of money for every single person arrested, so they were trying to arrest everybody. The veterans were giving them the most problems, so they started really hassling them. And this all they were going back and counting all the ballots inside. They would lock themselves in the jail and then count ballots and then announce the winner. And it was official, it was secure, and just trust us, we counted them right. Well, they told them, no, we're not going to let you do that. We want a public count. And then they tried to do that anyway. A battle ensued. And basically, long story short, these World War II veterans, with their guns, protected their rights to vote and restored order back to Athens, Tennessee.
Yeah.
Now, this whole story is very fascinating. I suggest anybody who's out there listening that sounds mildly interested in this, go check out this link, because the whole story is way better than what I just made it. I mean, I just kind of gave you the too long didn't read, mumble through, but the whole background, the way it all became to be, and then how these people fought to take the power back. This is the only kind of stuff in history where any real change happens, is when people get sick and tired of this crap and stand together. So.
And it's constitutional, Ron.
Well, absolutely. Maybe.
Have you guys heard Jeremy Corsey, who's like a former CIA agent that now spends a lot of time on the web sharing stories? He came out on a Alex Jones sort of DC field trip. I don't quite understand what it was. It was like a 3-hour event of which he has 20 minutes. And he said quite blatantly, in these words, before Trump got elected, I was approached by a number of generals that said, we are going to have a counter coup against the Obama presidency. We won't tolerate this any longer. We are going to have a military coup. And they said, and it paused for a little bit, and then they heard that Trump was willing to run, and they said, okay, as a result of this, we're not going to do this as a military adventure. We're going to go do this legitimately. He's going to be elected, and then we're going to do this to go clear out the deep state. So
Yeah.
he said he's one of the people that says Q is very real. I have been approached by these people, and um, and this is why I think that this is true. So that makes you want to put some faith into Jeremy Corsey, who may or may not be telling the truth. I mean, once a spook, always a spook, right? Um, but that's one of the stories too that gives me some faith of maybe this guy is pretty true, because I do, Obama was out there clearing out generals, and they were not necessarily following the orders that Obama was giving. It's not that hard to imagine that people in the military said, "All right, enough is enough. We're done with this."
Yeah, it's kind of like the Battle of Athens on the federal scale, but without turning into a hot war.
Had you guys heard that about Jeremy Corsey before? Is that new news?
Yeah, I know. He had just said that in like this big speech that's going around on YouTube.
Yep.
He like broke that down in a recent speech that's been getting a lot of views.
So
Ron?
with regard to Jeremy Corsey, you judge the tree by the fruit by the tree, and the stuff he brings out is amazing as far as I'm concerned. So why not trust him on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, and again, um, I think the people that are skeptical, I think they have every single right to be skeptical, and part of me is skeptical, and part of me is waiting for somebody to say or to give me very convincing proof that the whole thing's been a LARP, and I got egg on my face. Although, if the egg on my face is we are exposing pedophiles and we are helping to go expand the country's understanding of how deep these networks are, and that's what I've been tricked into helping, I'm going to be okay with that. On the flip side, if it is legitimate and this is all hastening how quickly the public can consume knowledge, create knowledge, and identify targets of who's involved, why they're involved, and why they should be taken down. I mean, that to me is also very promising. I mean, if it's real, it's awesome. And if it's all a LARP, then it wasn't even time wasted.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting year. I mean, we have this military parade planned for Veterans Day coming up, and a lot of people think that's going to be like the victory march against the Illuminati. So we might see a little more disclosure by then, but who knows? I mean, I don't know if Q will ever be acknowledged by Trump and the government as being not a LARP, but it's definitely interesting to follow.
So,
go for
since Q is a supposed Trump insider, and because Trump appears to possibly be working towards, maybe the will of the people, what would it take for you guys to be convinced that so we have all these sealed indictments. We have like a couple of them showing up now, and one of them happens to be the Inixium. I keep forgetting how to pronounce that, but anyway, you know what I'm talking about, that cult that just got busted. What's it going to take to like make you want to reelect Trump to continue his, I mean, is it?
I'm pretty sure I'm done voting. I don't want more government ever.
Well, right, but there's going to be a president next time, and I I don't know. I've heard all the different anarchist arguments against voting quite a bit for years, actually, and I've went through this, and the way it looks at, I don't know. You can't really blame somebody for voting for less lashes from their master's slave whip, like that's not saying that slave whip should exist. That's just saying I'd rather have less whips, right? You can't really say that's actual I'm searching for the word, basically making the system legitimate. You're not legitimizing it by voting it. Like you're just making your future a little bit more comfortable. But yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it. Like a slave, you get to choose between two slave masters, right? So this one is a little bit nicer than this one. You're obviously, you shouldn't be a slave to begin with, but given the choice, knowing for a fact that no matter what you choose, one of them is going to be picked anyway. There's not a reason not. I mean, it's.
But I think that's exactly why I'm on Steam. I mean, I'm not against having some kind of system that is mutually agreed upon for the creation of money and how it's used, and I'm not against some levels of organization. I just don't want to be forced to do anything. And as I look into some of like the legal aspects of how the fraud is perpetrated, I believe in things like the straw man. And I personally, one of the reasons why I believe in the straw man being that you have yourself and a corporate self. I got into a little bit of illegal trouble because I failed to update some like an oil tank that I had control over, and I got pulled into court, and they went after my all caps name. And then when I failed to show because I actually got my dates wrong, they sent the exact same court sent me a different complaint, but now it was addressed to my upper and lowercase name. So I've actually been in a position where I have personally, from the exact same court, been directly had conversation or had communication from the court addressing both me as what I'd consider my person and me addressing my straw man. And so, along with other things that make me think that's true, I've had personal experience there. And so, as I'm sort of looking at this bigger picture, I think that there's aspects of this that are happening on the legal front too that make me quite somewhere between anxious and hopeful. I don't know. I rambled a little because I forgot exactly. I forgot how I was going to go pull that back to Q, but there's just I guess part of this is just that the fraud and the scope of this thing is absolutely enormous. And on that same line, the court system itself is practicing something like maritime law. And I've written letters to judges for shitty little traffic tickets where I've said verbatim, "You're committing a crime against humanity," and I've defined where that crime has happened. And whereas I'm in a courtroom and all these other people are getting, it doesn't matter what they ask, what they say, what happens, the judge says, "Nope, you're guilty. Nope, you're guilty. Nope, you're guilty. Nope, you're guilty." And I'm sitting there the entire morning. And then they get to me and they don't even let me speak. And they say, "Your case is dismissed. You're free to go." And in that court case that I'm referencing, I was guilty. I was actually guilty of the infraction that they put me under. They said that I was crossing there's a crosswalk and there were people in it, and I drove through the middle, and I absolutely did that. No doubt in my mind, I did that. And yet, as I'm sitting there accusing them of crimes against humanity and running basically a false court, the judge actually dismissed my case. So I have some faith that there are things like the straw man. There are things that are like the court system isn't the way that we see it. The laws aren't the way that we see them, and I think that's important as we're sort of going forward here of trying to figure out how do we get actual justice? How do we get it so that I know what all this was about. It's all about voting. And part of this is that if I want to go vote to go change things, part of what I'm nervous about is that I think it might actually be your registration to vote. That when you actually go out and say, "Yes, I agree," that you're actually more or less signing up to be a volunteer employee of the government corporation, and that's the very moment that you start falling under the laws or the codes and statutes that they've put together. So I get nervous about, yeah, I'd like this other system to work, and I'd prefer to go live in that and to not give any attention to the United States. And in terms of voting, from the pieces that I've done, and I've had some success in the courtroom arguing the things that I've spoken about, so I have some feeling like I'm on the right track. I get nervous specifically about voting and registering to vote, because I think that's the exact moment when you're actually giving some control to the government to say you're a volunteer employee of the corporation exercising some right to go vote for which slave master you're going to have. And by doing that, that's when you're actually giving consent to go be in the system. And that to me is very, very scary.
The reason the judge let you go is because you removed your consent.
Yep.
And there are certain rules that we are not privy to know that they have to abide by. And when you remove your consent and you argue your case as you have, even if you think it was fraudulent, you went up against a fraudulent system in the first place. And so they just had to let you go. Most people accept the court, and when you step into a dock, that is actually you giving consent for being judged. So the maritime law is quite deep, and we don't even know half of it. But man, that rabbit hole is deep as well. This whole corporation thing and court system, courts by themselves are corporations.
Yep, I discovered that too. All the courts have their own legal entity that's an all caps name. The judge actually had a corporation listed. So I know this is off topic of Q, but I just keep trying to figure out, what does an alternative look like? How do we know when we've actually achieved peace? How do we know when we've won? How do I know when, like, I can spend my days like hanging out with my kids and playing frisbee golf rather than sitting here on a Saturday morning?
It's when the majority remove their consent. That's when we win.
So those are the things that I dream of. So look, guys, we have about 8 minutes left. What I'd like you to do is sort of, what do you want people walking away from this thing knowing? What do you think that they should be exploring? Like, where does your brain go? So let's go do Dylan, then Global Cop, then Ron, and then I'll close up and we'll call this thing a morning. Dylan?
Okay. Yeah, I would say, I'm pretty convinced that Q is probably legit, but, I do maintain skepticism. I've been making a lot of memes lately and joking, like, with like just saying like Q is fact and all these memes, sort of like putting more confidence in Q than I really have. But it's really just, I'm past 50% convinced that he's fact. I'm not going to put a definitive percentage on it, but it's pretty high. But at the same time, I think it's important to question everything he posts, because even if he has been real, at any point he could be replaced by someone else, or it could have switched entities at some point along the line. So definitely question what he says, research it yourself, and research even beyond what he says. I mean, don't let the narrative be controlled by the mainstream media or even by Q, because in a way, Q kind of has been following the mainstream media narrative. And I think it's also important to research things like you and I have been talking about, Agrod, like ancient Egypt history, even like ancient Atlantis history. Just, research wherever you're led by your interest and what seems important to you. And definitely research, technology, free energy. Don't let Q control the narrative. Don't let the mainstream media control the narrative. So yeah, that's what I would say going away from this.
Globo?
Very good points, Dylan, though. What I would say is that don't put Q in the center of your thinking or investigation. Make it part of the information puzzle of the data gathering. It sits there lots of puzzle pieces that help getting the actual bigger picture. There's so much going on in the world. We are living in an information war, and we are being rained on with bullets of data, information. Some of them are fake, some of them are real. It's really hard to get the right picture. To make QAnon the center of our investigation or belief system would be a big mistake. Just take it as it is. View the data and exercise critical thinking.
Ron?
The future proves the past.
Ron, I'm gonna troll all of your posts with Q drop lanes. I know you. It's not actually that big of a commitment because you only post once a month. But on every time you post, I'll be there with some kind of trolling statement of future proves past, where we go one, we go all. Or, I don't know. I'll start putting like reptilian Illuminati cloned Hitler eyes on everything.
Is that a promise? That might actually motivate me to post more.
I mean, if you post more, I will certainly start trolling them. If that would motivate you, you guys don't post enough, and that's how you make money here. So
I need to be trolled more. I appreciate all the happy cheeriness of Steam It in some cases, but in a lot of the cases, I want some people to be like, dude, you're wrong, or like just call me a dumbass. I don't care of it. The plastic smiles of Steam It kind of get to me a little.
Well, other than do you have anything more serious than the future?
Oh yeah, we're going. We're getting off on tangents here. I would just, like I said earlier, people really need to understand the history. People need to understand that the federal government will blow up innocent children, will experiment on them. This stuff has happened over and over again. They will blow up a building full of, with a daycare full of kids in order to for their agenda, to complete their agenda. They will, the state of Israel will blow up a boatload of Jewish refugees, their own people, supposedly, in order to facilitate the plan, the establishment of Israel. This is not conspiracy theory. These are all verifiable things that have happened. And once you start understanding like what's at stake, what these people will do for power, and that really anything goes, you can start at least piecing together part of the big picture. I mean, it's all been so obfuscated, and there's so much disinformation out there. To say anybody knows for sure is really stretching it, I guess. But just go out there and research the stuff that has been proven in the past. If you don't know already, if you're not at that point, because that is one of the biggest things that can. I mean, and it takes a person with a strong stomach to go actually read testimony of child torture. You're right. Like it's not for everybody, but it's something that really, you can't just hide reality and act like reality is not happening. Like you need to understand the depraved depths that this has gone to and where we're at today, and to not speak out against this, to not be educating your fellow man about this, for us not to be all up in arms is a travesty of history. People are going to look back and be like, wow, these people really had the highest politicians just raping and pillaging their children and picking them up with CPS only to be, abused over and over again from foster home to foster home and covered up by the highest echelons of government. And they had guns and they didn't do anything about it. Like the people in the future, I think are going to be looking back at us with a sense of like, man, humanity is really fucking stupid. So we just need to get a sense of awareness here. I think spreading the word is the best we can do right now. And eventually it's going to come to a boil where it doesn't have to be violent. It just needs to be a show of force. and a real show of force with the threat of violence, and something could peacefully happen. Just like a robber showing up with a knife to steal your wallet, and you pull out a gun in his face, you don't have to shoot him in the face. You still have a peaceful resolution by a show of force, right? And that's what it's going to take.
All right. Well, I think where I would leave people is this is something worth looking into. I think that there's enough evidence to go convince me that the Q phenomena is real and is connected to Donald Trump, and I think that Trump is doing things to go reduce the human trafficking, to go reduce some of the criminal behavior, to sort of take the criminal elements out of the United States government. And as long as that's occurring, then I think both the Trump presidency and the Q phenomena are good things. That doesn't mean that everything that they're doing is okay. I mean, I got a little bit nervous by certainly some of the actions that our government is doing. So I don't want to just go out here and say 100% yes, this is true and everything is awesome. But my biggest concerns right now are pedophilia, human trafficking, and sort of deep state treason, and that seems to be getting the limelight at the moment. So I'm going to keep supporting these things, but I'm also wary that the whole thing, if it's not just a public awakening thing, is in fact a psyop. If it's not a LARP, it could be a psyop, and the psyop ends up, starts with some truth and then gets converted to taking you down places that aren't helpful. So I'm trying to be sort of alert to those as well. So in the meantime, I'm hopeful and believe that we're going down a good path with this, and it's a good experiment to go investigate, and trying to remain skeptical enough that hey, maybe not everything is awesome. And with that, I'm going to go bring this thing to a close. I'd like to thank Globo. I'd like to thank Dylan. I'd like to thank Ron. Thank you for folks that are chilling with us. For the people that watch this in retrospect, maybe we'll be on to something. Maybe the maybe the future will prove the past of this argument. But anyways, you've been listening to MSP Waves. I'm your host, Agrode. It is March 21st. It is now 1 p.m. And thanks for stopping by.